You ever walk into a room and feel like the music should change? Like the lights should follow you? Like something important is about to happen because you just arrived? At first, it feels like confidence, like self-worth finally showing up. But then it lingers, and you start to wonder if everyone's looking at you, or should be. You start crafting moments in your head that haven't even happened. And when life doesn't play along, you feel empty, lost, overlooked. That's not just imagination. That's the beginning of something deeper, something dangerous, something called main character syndrome. This is BrainTrap TV. We don't just explain what's happening, we unravel the stories you didn't know you were trapped in. And this one, it's more common than anyone wants to admit. Main character syndrome isn't an official diagnosis, but it's real, it's emotional, and it's spreading. It's that quiet voice whispering, "Why isn't everyone noticing me?" It's the craving to feel like the star of every room, every story, every life. It's that addictive urge to make every situation about you, even when it isn't. And no, it doesn't mean you're selfish. It means something inside you is trying to matter, trying to be seen, trying not to disappear into the background. But in that desperate attempt to feel real, you start living in a fantasy, one where you're the only one who feels, the only one who hurts, the only one whose story matters. You start rewriting conversations in your head, not how they happened, but how they should have. You turn pain into plot twists, victories into monologues. You become addicted to perception. You need people to witness your struggle, your transformation, your rebirth. Not because you're narcissistic, but because you're afraid that if no one sees it, it's not real. So you start curating, not just your feed, but your life. You frame moments. You filter thoughts. You act for an invisible audience you've never met. And slowly, reality becomes a performance. But here's the question nobody asks. What happens when the spotlight fades? When the people around you stop clapping? When the world moves on to someone else's scene? You feel betrayed, forgotten, like your movie got canceled mid-season. And that's when the pain hits. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that whispers, "Was I ever really important?" That's the trap of the main character mindset. It promises empowerment, but what it delivers is isolation. Because in a world full of people trying to be seen, nobody's really looking at each other. So how do you escape it? You start by asking the question no main character wants to hear. What if this moment isn't about me? And if that question made your stomach twist a little, good. That's where we begin. It's strange how easily we start believing we're the center of everything. Not because we're arrogant, but because we're afraid. Afraid that if we're not the main character, we'll disappear. That we'll become invisible in a world already moving too fast to notice quiet souls. So we overcompensate. We make everything about us. Our pain, our progress, our story. And in doing so, we stop seeing the people right in front of us. We say we care, but only when their stories don't compete with ours. We say we listen, but only until it stops being about us. And the truth is, somewhere along the way, we stopped connecting. We started performing. And no one told us that performance would be this lonely. Social media didn't help. It taught us that life only matters when it's seen, when it's filtered, framed, shared, and validated. It taught us to chase moments, not presence. Aesthetic over authenticity. The illusion of depth over real vulnerability. And we ran with it. We became producers of our own lives, building highlight reels and branding our personalities. We started writing ourselves into stories we never lived, just to feel like we were part of something bigger than the silence we were sitting in. Main character syndrome doesn't start with ego. It starts with absence. The absence of being truly seen. It starts when you've been overlooked one too many times. When your voice was ignored. When your pain was downplayed. When your identity was reduced to a side note in everyone else's narrative. So you took control. You became the star. Because at least that way, your story was yours to tell. Even if it was a little too loud, a little too curated, a little too much. But no one tells you what it costs. No one tells you that living like you're the only one who matters eventually makes you feel like you're the only one who exists. And there's nothing more painful than realizing that even in a crowded room, you're utterly alone. Because you turned people into mirrors, into audience members. You didn't really see them. You saw what they reflected back to you. Approval, envy, praise, attention. And if they didn't reflect the version of you that you wanted, you erased them. Silently, emotionally, maybe even physically. You started expecting everyone to understand you, but you stopped trying to understand them. Their stories were interruptions. Their needs, distractions. You became so addicted to your own narrative arc, you forgot that empathy isn't a side character, it's the plot. And that's where the pain starts to catch up. Because no matter how much you try to script your life, real moments slip through. People disappoint you. Plans collapse. You're not always the hero. Sometimes you're the problem. Sometimes you're the storm. Sometimes you're not in the story at all. And that hurts. But that's also where freedom lives. Because the moment you realize you're not the center, you're finally able to see. To see the friend who stopped calling because your conversations were one-sided. To see the partner who tried to express their pain, but you were too busy narrating your own. To see the parent who never asked for much, but always hoped you'd ask how they were doing. To see the stranger on the train, crying quietly, who just needed one person to not be consumed by their phone, or their ego, or their curated existence. We all want to be important. That's not a flaw. That's being human. But importance doesn't come from being the loudest voice in the room. It comes from being the one who listens when no one else does. You don't need to be the most interesting person in the story. You just need to be real, present, available, not to everyone, but to the moments that matter. Because if you keep chasing the main character fantasy, you'll wake up one day and realize that everyone else stopped showing up. They got tired of competing with your storyline, of being edited out, of being tolerated instead of treasured. And you'll be left with nothing but silence. A silence that no applause can fill. So what do? You stop. You stop performing long enough to listen. You stop narrating your emotions long enough to feel them. You stop rewriting the past just to make yourself look better. And you start telling the truth. You admit that you're scared, that you don't always feel seen, that you've tried to turn your life into a movie because reality felt too fragile, too unremarkable, too ordinary. And then you realize, ordinary isn't bad. Ordinary is real. And real? That's where the healing starts. You begin to show up to conversations without needing to control them. You let people talk. You ask questions without redirecting. You stop turning their pain into your plot twist. You let people be people, not props, not mirrors, not extras. And suddenly, the world expands. It stops being a spotlight. It becomes a sunrise. Because the truth is, you're not supposed to be the main character in everyone's life. And you're not meant to be the center of every moment. But you can be someone worth remembering. Not because you demanded the attention, but because you gave it. You made space. You saw people. You mattered quietly. And maybe, just maybe, that's what it means to really be human. There's a strange kind of sadness that comes with realizing the world doesn't revolve around you. A heavy, quiet grief. Not because you were arrogant, but because for a long time, it was the only way you felt like you mattered. You made yourself the center of every room, not out of selfishness, but survival. You needed to believe you were important. You needed to believe your story had meaning. Because if you weren't the main character, then what were you? Just another face in the crowd? Another story no one would ever read? But here's what they don't tell you. Freedom begins where that illusion ends. Because when you're no longer performing, you're finally allowed to feel. Not the curated, poetic pain that plays well in a reel, but the raw, unedited emotions that don't need an audience. The kind that doesn't look pretty. The kind that doesn't rhyme. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. You begin to notice things. The way your mother's voice shakes when she talks about her childhood. The way your friend hesitates before opening up because they're afraid you'll turn their story into a comparison. The way your partner goes quiet during conversations, not because they're distant, but because they're used to being interrupted. You start to feel ashamed. A quiet, aching guilt that creeps in when you realize how many people you never really saw. Not because you didn't care, but because you were too focused on being seen yourself. And that's when the shift begins. It's subtle at first. You start letting people talk longer. You stop filling silences with anecdotes about yourself. You stop needing to be the smartest voice in the room, the most emotional, the most intense. You realize that someone else's pain doesn't have to compete with yours, that their joy doesn't threaten your value, that you don't need to be the center to feel complete. But letting go isn't easy. You've built your identity around being interesting, around being noticed, around being admired. You've spent so long playing the role, you forgot how to just be a person, a real one, with no script, no soundtrack, no story arc, just breath, and flaws, and softness. You'll resist it at first. You'll slip back into performance. You'll catch yourself turning a vulnerable conversation into a monologue. You'll feel the urge to twist every interaction back toward yourself because it's safe there. You know that spotlight. It's warm. It's predictable. It makes you feel important, but it also makes you feel alone. Because here's the truth you're finally ready to hear. The more you demand to be the main character, the less connected you become. People stop opening up. They start censoring themselves around you. They stop inviting you into their real world because they know you'll turn it into a subplot for your own. And when they stop showing up, you'll tell yourself it's their fault, that they didn't get you, that they couldn't handle your depth, your energy, your complexity. But deep down, you'll know. They didn't leave because you were too much. They left because you weren't really there. So what do you do when that realization hits? You get quiet. You start small. You start asking questions, not to be polite, but to understand. You listen, not to reply, but to witness. You let people exist without needing to relate to everything they say. You allow stories to unfold without editing them in your mind to make yourself the hero. You begin to love more generously because you're not loving to be loved back. You're loving because it matters, because it's real, because other people's happiness doesn't dim your own. And in that stillness, something incredible happens. You begin to see life as it actually is. Not a movie, not a highlight reel, but a series of real, messy, beautiful moments that don't need your control. You stop narrating. You stop rehearsing. You stop wondering how you'll tell this story later. And you just live it. You make room for someone else to be the main character. And strangely enough, you don't disappear. You become more real than you've ever been. Because for the first time, your worth isn't tied to attention. It's tied to presence, to empathy, to silence, to being the kind of person who listens with their whole heart, even when no one's watching. And people will notice, not in the way you're used to, not with applause or admiration or likes, but with trust, with love, with quiet thank yous and unexpected confessions, with deeper conversations, with real connection. Because the truth is, no one wants a performer. They want a person, someone who can sit in the uncomfortable without turning it into a scene, someone who can feel without needing a reaction, someone who can be present, not perfect. You'll lose some people along the way. The ones who only stayed for the character you played. The ones who were drawn to the show, not the soul. Let them go, because the ones who stay, they'll love the real you. The flawed, uncertain, unfiltered version. The one who's learning. The one who's growing. The one who stopped performing long enough to connect. And when that happens, when you look around and realize you're surrounded by people who aren't props or extras or plot devices, but full stories of their own, that's when you'll understand. You were never meant to be the main character in everyone else's life. You were meant to be real in your own. And that's more than enough. You spent so long trying to be unforgettable that you forgot how to just be honest. That's what this journey really is. Letting go of the need to be extraordinary all the time. Letting go of the narrative, the ego, the curated self. Because real life isn't a perfect scene. It's awkward silences. It's bad angles. It's saying the wrong thing and learning from it. It's showing up even when you don't feel interesting or profound or main character enough. And yet, that's where the beauty is. You were never supposed to be the loudest voice in the room or the most inspiring person in the story. You were supposed to be real, present, open, the kind of person who doesn't need to be seen all the time to know they exist. Because when you stop needing the spotlight, you find peace in the shadows. You realize that life isn't happening for you to perform. It's happening for you to feel, to grow, to witness, to connect. You begin to cherish the small things. Someone telling you their story without fear of being overshadowed. A shared silence that doesn't need filling. Being there for someone without needing it to be about you. You stop needing validation to feel worthy. You stop trying to stand out and start trying to show up. Because the deepest moments in life don't come with applause. They come with presence, with depth, with humility. And maybe the most powerful thing you can do now is disappear from your own narrative just long enough to hear someone else's. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. It's not giving up the spotlight. It's realizing you never needed one in the first place. You were never supposed to be the show. You were always meant to be a part of something bigger, something connected, something real. And that's what BrainTrap TV is about. Not just understanding yourself, but remembering that you're not alone. You're one thread in a larger story. A story that's richer, deeper, and more meaningful when you stop trying to control it. So if you've felt this, if you've recognized yourself in these words, Don't run. Don't perform your healing. Just begin it. Quietly, gently, truthfully. You don't need to be the main character to live a meaningful life. You just need to be honest in it. This was BrainTrap TV. Thank you for showing up, for being real, for listening, not just to us, but to yourself. Until next time, stay present, stay human, stay grounded.